What if I told you that bending over to touch your toes and just holding that stretch for 30 seconds is actually programming your body to stay stiff?
Yeah, it is pretty much the exact opposite of what you actually want to be doing.
Right. I mean, it is the universal routine we all picked up in like middle school gym class. And for most of us, it really hasn't translated into any meaningful long-term flexibility. You still wake up feeling like your joints are completely rusted shut.
Oh, absolutely. And today we are looking at a stack of sources that basically prove traditional stretching is largely an illusion. The feeling of tightness is actually just your brain putting the brakes on your body because of a perceived weakness.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we are exploring a highly effective and honestly somewhat intimidating mobility protocol called PAILS and RAILS. It's a concept developed within the Kinstretch system.
And it completely challenges the entire premise of how we view our own anatomy. I mean, we're moving away from this old idea that muscles are just, mechanical rubber bands that need to be passively pulled apart.
Like taffy or something.
Exactly. We are diving into the reality that mobility is actually a central nervous system function. It requires really active, intense neurological training rather than just passive relaxation.
To navigate all of this, we're pulling from 3 incredibly detailed instructional sources by YouTube mobility experts. We've got Markow Training Systems, Alex Murphy, and Amir Zandinejad, who goes by Beard the Best You Can Be.
All really fantastic resources.
Yeah, they are. And our mission today is to demystify this confusing acronym, explain why your current routine probably isn't sticking, and uncover how you can actually hack your nervous system to claim lifelong, usable mobility.
Right, because let's unpack this. Because to understand how PAILS and RAILS actually works, we first have to redefine the sensation of feeling tight.
Right, because tightness is a universally misunderstood signal. Like when you reach for your toes and your hamstrings start screaming at you, your muscles haven't necessarily shrunk in physical length.
Which is the mental image we all have, right? Like the fibers are actually getting shorter. Exactly, but that's not it. Instead, you are hitting a hard limit that's imposed by your nervous system. Your brain is essentially acting as a strict biological governor.
So it's controlling the range.
Yes, it constantly monitors and dictates exactly how much range of motion a specific joint is allowed to access. And it bases this on a really complex algorithm of data. It looks at your previous physical traumas, your daily movement habits, and honestly, the most critical metric of all, which is your strength in those extreme ranges.
I love the specific analogy Alex Murphy uses for this in the sources. It frames the biology so well. He calls the human body a conservation machine. He kind of likens it to an incredibly stingy accountant managing a calorie budget.
That accountant idea is perfect.
Yeah.
If you take that further, we have to look at mobility as a biological expense. I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint, maintaining tissue length requires a constant expenditure of energy.
Right. Keeping those sarcomeres capable of full expansion isn't free.
Exactly. So if you spend, say, 8 to 10 hours a day sitting at a desk with your shoulders rolled forward, your pectoral muscles are just in a perpetually shortened state.
Which is basically everyone listening to this right now.
Pretty much. And your nervous system, playing the role of that stingy accountant, audits your daily movement. It sees that you literally never utilize the full, expansive range of motion of your chest wall.
So it just cuts the funding.
That's exactly it. To the brain, expending precious metabolic energy to maintain a physiological capability you never use is just a massive waste of resources. So it stops maintaining the neural pathways required to open that joint fully.
It reallocates the budget. That makes so much sense. And Markow Training Systems approaches this from another angle that isolates the mechanism of the stretch reflex. He compares the body's neurological limits to a computer governor on a high-performance sports car.
Oh, that's a great one too.
Yeah, it is. So mechanically speaking, the car's engine and chassis might be built to comfortably handle 160 miles per hour. But the manufacturer installs a computer chip that cuts the fuel line at 140 miles per hour. It's a built-in safety mechanism so the driver doesn't lose control and crash.
Right, it's protecting the system from itself.
Exactly. Oh, wait, so is feeling tight just my brain acting as that computer chip, like cutting my range of motion because it calculates I'm too weak to handle that extra 20 miles per hour of depth?
Yes, you nailed it. The underlying mechanism there is the stretch reflex, which is driven by these sensory receptors in your muscles called muscle spindles.
Okay, muscle spindles.
Right. When you push a joint into a deep, unfamiliar stretch, those spindles detect a really rapid change in length. They panic and send a danger signal straight back to the spinal cord.
Like an alarm going off.
Exactly. And the nervous system immediately fires a signal back to the muscle telling it to contract. It just hits the brakes. And it does this because it knows you lack the motor control and the physical strength to absorb or produce force in that weird extreme position.
Wow. Because if it let you go further, the sheer mechanical stress could cause a tear.
Precisely. Tightness, in almost every scenario, is simply weakness in disguise.
That is such a wild paradigm shift. So if the nervous system is this hyperprotective gatekeeper holding the keys to our flexibility, how do we convince it to open the gate?
Well, we have to provide biological proof that we are actually safe in that extended range.
And that leads us to the protocol itself. So PAILS stands for Progressive Angular Isometric Loading, and RAILS stands for Regressive Angular Isometric Loading. Now, I do have to push back on the terminology here just a bit.
Sure, go for it.
Isometric literally means same length, right? It implies no movement. You are pushing against an immovable object. So how on earth do we expand our range of motion without moving? And wait, how is this different from just contracting and relaxing, like PNF stretching?
That is a really common question. The distinction between PNF and this system is where the physiological changes actually occur. PNF is essentially just a neurological trick.
Like a temporary hack.
Exactly. By contracting the muscle and then relaxing it, you trigger this thing called autogenic inhibition. It temporarily silences those muscle spindles we just talked about.
So you turn off the car's governor for a few minutes?
Right, which lets you push into a deeper range, but you haven't actually altered the tissue architecture. You haven't built strength in that new range, and you definitely haven't trained the opposite tissue.
So you gain the range, walk away, and then what? You just lose it.
Yeah, you lose it very quickly. Because the nervous system still knows you lack strength there, so it reestablishes the governor by the time you wake up the next morning.
Oh, wow. So PNF is just picking the lock, but the nervous system changes the locks overnight.
That is a perfect way to put it. Now, to address your pushback on how isometric loading creates actual movement, the expansion of range doesn't happen during the isometric contraction itself.
Okay, so when does it happen?
The isometric effort happens at the absolute end of your current restricted range. When you perform a PAILS contraction, which is the progressive element, you are isometrically loading the tissue that is actively being stretched.
Like firing the hamstring while you're stretching it?
Yes. By generating high amounts of force at that specific restricted joint angle without moving, you are sending a massive signal back to the central nervous system.
You are basically proving to the brain, hey, I have force production capabilities here. I am strong enough to control this position.
Exactly. And once the brain receives and verifies that data, it updates its motor mapping. It actively lowers the threat level, which then allows the tissue to yield and grants you access to those next few degrees of movement.
So you're negotiating for more territory by proving you can defend the border you already have.
I love that, yes. But that only covers the progressive side.
Right. What about the rails part?
What's fascinating here is the regressive piece. The rails is where you immediately follow up by isometrically loading the shortening tissue.
So if you are stretching your hamstrings, the rails contraction means intensely firing your hip flexors and your quads, the exact muscles on the front of your leg that actively pull you deeper into the stretch.
Yes. And what is so incredible is how that rails contraction fundamentally changes the nature of the flexibility you get. You are conditioning the nervous system through reciprocal inhibition while also building actual structural capacity.
Because passive flexibility is kind of useless, right? Like in a dynamic environment, say a basketball game or a heavy weightlifting session.
Completely useless. You need active mobility. Rails actively contracts the precise tissue responsible for pulling your skeleton into that specific alignment. You are proving to your brain that you own both sides of the joint mechanism.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When we look at how Amir Zandinejad breaks down the actual mechanics of a session, the intensity of this whole dialogue with the nervous system becomes very clear.
Yeah, it's not a relaxing yoga class, that's for sure.
Definitely not. Let's trace the steps using a basic seated hamstring stretch as the model. Just standard hip flexion. You get into the base position, find the absolute limit of your active range, and then lean just slightly forward into a passive stretch. And the sources are incredibly adamant about this next part. You must hold this passive stretch for a minimum of 2 full minutes before doing any active isometric work.
Right, and that 2-minute threshold isn't just an arbitrary number. It is deeply grounded in tissue physiology and mechanotransduction.
Mechanotransduction. What exactly happens during those 2 minutes?
Well, when you first enter a stretch, that stretch reflex is highly active. It takes about 2 minutes of sustained, calm, passive tension for the mechanoreceptors in the tissue to finally desensitize.
So it takes that long for the neurological alarm bells to quiet down.
Exactly. The tissue actually begins to physically yield, creating the necessary slack in the system. It basically sets the baseline for the neurological training that follows.
Okay, so the 2-minute mark hits. The active work starts with the PAILS contraction. You create total, full-body tension. You are radiating stiffness through your core and your arms so energy doesn't leak out.
Right, everything is tight.
Then, for 20 seconds, you start driving your stretched leg, like your heel, down into the floor, firing the hamstring. But Amir emphasizes a critical safety protocol here. You do not instantly exert maximum force.
No, absolutely not. That would be dangerous.
You ramp up the tension. You start at 20% effort, push to 40, and maybe build to 80 or 90% over the course of those 20 seconds. Why is the ramping so important?
The ramping process is a very deliberate communication strategy with your central nervous system. You are preparing to produce massive amounts of force in a lengthened and, frankly, very vulnerable position.
So if you bypass the ramp and just spike your force to 100%,
The brain perceives a catastrophic threat. It assumes a muscle tear is imminent, and it will trigger a massive protective spasm. Ramping gives the local tissue and the central nervous system time to smoothly recruit motor units. It lets the body accept the mechanical load without panicking.
that makes total sense. So after 20 seconds of that ramping push, you hit the transition to rails. Without changing your body position at all, you immediately stop driving the heel down and spend 15 seconds trying to actively lift the leg off the floor.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
No, I bet. You are demanding maximum effort from the hip flexors to pull yourself millimeters deeper into that newly yielded space. And Amir refers to a very specific phenomenon that often happens during this rapid switch. He calls it the Cramp Sniper.
Oh man, the Cramp Sniper.
It sounds so dramatic, but what is physically causing that intense misfire?
It is a brilliant descriptor. The Cramp Sniper is essentially acute neurological confusion. When you abruptly switch from a maximum PAILS push to a maximum rails pull, you're suddenly demanding extremely high force output from the regressive tissue.
The hip flexors, in this case.
Right, while they are in their most shortened, most disadvantaged position. The nervous system simply hasn't mapped the motor unit pathways for high-intensity work at that specific extreme angle.
So the brain is basically trying to run high-end software on unformatted hardware, and it just crashes.
That is exactly what happens. The signaling gets completely scrambled, the motor cortex overfires, and the muscle just locks up in a protective cramp.
But the sources note that the fix here isn't to just panic and abandon the stretch entirely.
Right, you don't want to bail out.
You just lower the intensity of the pull, or you slow down your transition until the nervous system physically builds out that neural pathway. And then following that 15-second rails contraction, you stop pulling, but you do not back out of the stretch.
This is a crucial detail.
Yeah, you stay in that newly acquired, deeper position and just rest for 45 seconds to let the nervous system process the data before you initiate a second round.
Staying in that new range during the rest period is absolutely vital. If you back out, you lose the neurological ground you literally just fought so hard to claim.
It's like giving back the territory you just conquered.
Exactly. But regarding the intensity of all this, we really need to address a critical distinction that is highlighted across all three of our sources.
The pain versus discomfort thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
This protocol is aggressive strength training at your end ranges. It is going to cause intense muscular discomfort. I'm talking deep burning and heavy fatigue.
Right, but there is a strict non-negotiable line between tissue discomfort and actual joint pain.
Very strict. Discomfort means the tissue is working. But a sharp pinching sensation, which is often felt on the closing angle of the joint, like a pinch in the front of your hip when you lean forward, that is mechanical impingement.
And the sources warn that pushing through that kind of sharp pain doesn't build tolerance at all. It just causes structural damage.
Yeah, you have to back out of the range until that pinch completely disappears and only perform your isometrics in a totally pain-free zone.
Got it. Also, there is a very significant caveat for listeners who are naturally hypermobile. Amir points out that if you can easily fold yourself in half without even trying, you shouldn't be doing the 2-minute passive stretch at all.
No, for the hypermobile population, the structural problem is actually reversed. You already possess excessive passive range of motion, which is often due to laxity in the ligaments and joint capsules.
So pushing for more passive flexibility is basically making things worse.
Exactly. It destabilizes the joint even further. For them, the objective shifts entirely to closing the gap between their massive passive range and the range they can actually actively control.
So a hypermobile person would just bypass the long passive hold entirely.
Right. They find the limit of their active range, push just a few degrees past it, and immediately begin the PAILS and RAILS isometrics. The goal is building neurological brakes for a system that currently only has an accelerator.
That is a great visual. So what does this all mean for daily life? Let's say you put in the grueling work. You battle the cramps, you manage the tension, and over a few sessions, you successfully carve out, say, 15 degrees of brand new internal rotation in your shoulder. What is the actual protocol for using that newly acquired space?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to recognize that the tissue you just unlocked is biologically naive.
Biologically naive.
Yes, Markow Training Systems provides a very stark warning regarding this phase. If you generate 15 new degrees of shoulder rotation, you do not immediately head to the gym and try to perform heavy overhead snatches in that brand new range.
Because your body literally has no historical data on how to stabilize that joint under load in that specific position.
Precisely. You have just introduced your nervous system to a sector of movement it hasn't mapped or structurally supported in years.
It's totally uncharted territory.
It is. And if you load it dynamically with heavy weight right away, the tissue lacks the load-bearing capacity to protect the joint, and honestly, injury is highly probable. You have to respect the biological laws of progressive overload.
Meaning you must spend weeks moving through that new range of motion with very light resistance.
Exactly. Intentionally acclimating the tissue, building localized hypertrophy, and just slowly increasing its structural tolerance.
You basically have to slowly lay down the asphalt before you drive the heavy truck over the new road.
I love that analogy, and Markow emphasizes that this entire process is a game of consistency over months, not days.
Right, because if you perform PAILs and RAILs for a week and then just stop, the nervous system will audit your activity, realize you aren't actually utilizing that new range, and the governor will lock it right back down.
Yep, the stingy accountant strikes again. But, the ultimate physiological objective of this system isn't to force you into a daily, agonizing isometric routine forever.
Thank goodness.
The end game is a concept they call cold mobility.
Cold mobility. Define that for us.
Cold mobility represents a fundamental shift in your baseline physiology. It is the capacity to wake up in the morning, step out of bed completely cold, without any foam rolling or warm-up routines at all, and just naturally possess the expansive, usable range of motion required to drop into a deep squat, swing a golf club, or reach overhead safely.
That sounds like a dream.
It really is.
Yeah.
It means you have permanently rewritten the nervous system's code. You've demonstrated consistent strength in those end ranges, so the brain permanently removes the governor. It makes your new mobility your permanent physiological normal.
That is incredible. Okay, to briefly recap our analysis today, we've explored how the sensation of physical tightness is rarely a mechanical tissue restriction, but rather a protective neurological governor reacting to a lack of end-range strength.
Right, tightness is weakness.
We dissected how temporary workarounds, like PNF stretching, completely fail to rewrite the nervous system software, whereas the PAILS and RAILS protocol uses very precise isometric loading to force the brain to grant new range.
By proving you own the territory.
Exactly. We walk through the mechanotransduction of a 2-minute stretch, the absolute necessity of ramping force, and how to navigate the intense neurological confusion of the Cramp Sniper. And all of this is in pursuit of true, permanent cold mobility.
All of this raises a really important question that extends far beyond just physical anatomy.
Yeah.
This entire biological framework relies on the concept of a nervous system governor, right?
The mechanism restricting it.
Right, a mechanism that physically restricts our bodily movement because it recognizes a profound lack of demonstrated strength in unfamiliar territory. It naturally prompts the question, how much of our intellectual rigidity, our ideological tightness, operates through the exact same neurological mechanism?
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating parallel.
Think about it. When we are confronted with a deeply unfamiliar or uncomfortable perspective, we often experience an immediate mental stiffness. We tense up, and our initial reflex is just to reject it.
We hit the brakes on the idea.
Exactly. But perhaps that ideological rigidity isn't an indicator that the opposing idea is inherently wrong. Perhaps it is just a psychological governor kicking in. It's protecting us simply because we haven't yet practiced holding our intellectual composure and our analytical strength in those uncomfortable cognitive ranges.
So overcoming physical tightness requires actively building strength and discomfort. And overcoming our ideological tightness likely requires the exact same protocol.
I really think so.
We have to actively train our mental end ranges.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the nervous system. The next time you wake up feeling like a stiff, rusty suit of armor, remember that your body doesn't need to be passively pulled apart. You need to initiate a very deliberate, active conversation with your nervous system. Until next time.